I want to try to give you an impression of maybe mainstream, I'm going out on a limb with this, but maybe mainstream kind of Japanese-Cuban life and political thought. Because I think our best friends there are not real typical. Francisco Miyasaka defended the revolution. He was swept up in the student movement around the time when Fidel and his compañeros took over and joined the Committee for Defense of the Revolution when it was actually an armed militia and fought against the counter-revolutionaries in the hills. And another gentleman here who was a few years older was caught up in the student movement during the revolution, Goro Enomoto, and worked with the underground in central Cuba and worked closely with Che. They aren't typical, of course. So what is more typical? Well, typical on the Isle of Youth was they were farmers, like Miguel and Sayako Harada. And they held much more traditional Japanese values of kind of playing low, go with the flow, gaman, shikata ganai, all that we identify very strongly with the Issei and Issei generation here. So I want to tell you a few stories about Miguel that will probably maybe resonate with you when you think about, well, if you're Nisei yourselves and your friends, and maybe your Nisei parents or grandparents. In the first trip, we were interviewing Miguel. We were just trying to get to know him. And he lives in that home where we were interviewing Miguel and Sayako's daughter, the one who didn't know what ethnic identity meant. And we were just trying to get to know him. And we asked him, well, one of us asked him, so, oh yeah, he was there. Yeah, he's a little older than a lot of the Nisei there. So he was about in his early teens, I think 12, 13, when his father was taken away and locked up in Presidio Modelo. And all the Nikkei adult men were locked up, but all their families had to fend for themselves, if you hadn't figured that out already. So Miguel was the oldest son. So, of course, he had a lot of responsibilities, and being 12 years old, he was old enough to work. So he and his mother basically kept the farm going and fed and clothed his younger siblings. Well, Dad was locked up. We asked him what that period was like, or what do you remember about that period? He just said, it was a lot of hard work. And then we asked him, so what was it like when your father came back? Even more hard work. and that got to give you an idea of what his life has been like. And he was a hard-working guy. You can look at his arms, look at his hands, his face. You could tell this guy's worked hard all his life. So on the second trip, we were celebrating Oshogatsu. And everyone else was sitting around tables, pulling cranes, or doing other activities that we had brought and to share with the Nikkei Cubans. And Miguel was kind of sitting off to the side by himself. So I went over to talk with him just to keep him company. And I asked him, well, did you ever learn how to fold origami? He said, no, I always had to work. And there were his younger brothers and sisters kind of off with the other folks, kind of, doing folding origami. And so anyways, we got into a conversation. And I won't relate the whole conversation, but at one point, one member of our group, who he knew was a medical doctor, walked by, and I guess the thought just occurred to him, how much does it cost to see a doctor in the United States? And there's no simple answer to that, right? So I tried to explain, well, do you have insurance? Do you not have insurance? Is it a covered condition, or is it something that would, not covered? Anyways, in my broken Spanish, I'm sure it sounded was even more confusing to him than it is in reality. But anyways, he got the idea. And his conclusion after all that was, life is simpler and better for old people here. And he was not a person who you would expect to, who was a gung-ho supporter of the revolution. He really had no reason to be. His father was actually a very successful farmer. They had a lot of land. They had so much land that they were over the limit when the revolution took over. So they actually lost more than half of their property. But he continued, they had plenty left over to continue farming, feeding the family, and making money by selling their crops to the government. for him, the revolution was almost like a change of customer. Before, he would grow his watermelons, his tomatoes, and so on, and sell them to an exporter who would send them off in Havana, who would send them off to Florida or the southern United States. After the revolution, he sold his crops to the government. But I think over time, the improvements of that the revolution made in the education system, and especially the healthcare system, began to kind of win him over. And I don't think he had ever had a thought of leaving Cuba, because he's a farmer, he's tied to his land. But he and some of the other older farmers told me, yeah, I was kind of doubtful at first, but, I'm with the revolution now. What's the other thing? Anyways, that was his oh yeah, the other thing is, I'm wondering now what he's thinking, because Raul Castro, and oh yeah, in case anyone was wondering, the transition is over. If you think there's going to be some big change when Fidel passes away, yeah, there will be a big funeral, but basically the political transition is over. And believe it or not, Cuba has had elections for many years, and they have a national assembly, a regular government, and so on. It's not a one-man dictatorship. And it's not Raul taking over for Fidel. Yeah, Raul's taking over the same political position Fidel had before, but the country has a government. But anyway, Raul and the new government are implementing some very rational, practical kinds of changes. And one of them is a second round of land reform, where they have recognized that certain small farmers, like Miguel and Saeco, are actually more productive than some of the collectivized farms that they've had in the past. So they're allowing more successful farmers, like Miguel, to own more land, or not own more land, but work more land and manage more land. So I'm wondering what I'm not in direct touch with them, but if I ever go back, that's one thing that I want to check up on, because a farmer with skills like his shouldn't be wasted. He should have his skills taken advantage of. Many of the farmers and many of the people with high skills in farming in Cuba do have their skills taken advantage of, but there were certain limits in terms of land ownership. So I'm wondering what's happening to him, because that was one of the questions that the next generation of Haradas had was, are we going, they didn't know that what was going to happen next with the government. Should we invest all of our time in the farm, or should we go off into the professions like a lot of our cousins have, who have become doctors and engineers and so on? Is it worth trying to invest our time in becoming farmers in the future?